What is love?
Baby, don't hurt me.
Is it the sum of a bunch of chemical reactions within the brain all culminating into feelings of connection with another brain with basically similar chemical flows? Or is it as simple as baby, don't hurt me? Wow, what a horrific joke. Why did I write that? But for that matter, people who claim to be soulmates, is there more to love involving like an ethereal bonding between two people? And even past that, if you could somehow induce the same chemical patterns within another brain, could you theoretically force someone to love someone else? The more pragmatic of our species will see love as quite literally the former over all the latters. A simple expression of oxytocin leading to bonding, dopamine leading to a feeling of high with that person, and adrenaline being released when you're near them, causing you to feel fluttery. All for one singular purpose: reproduction. Actually, come to mention it, that's really more of a pessimist take on anything, but others will see it as something that is like predestined. You were meant to meet that person at some particular point in time, and from there, spend the rest of your life together. And a lot of people would likely tell you it's kind of a blending of both, at least in my opinion. But there is something that is indisputable about love. The chemicals associated with it leads humans to pair off with one another. Just like how me and my wife, it's actually crazy to think about, but we've almost been together for a decade at this point. But these chemicals, although fading in time, through overcoming enough trials, will typically be replaced by a stronger bond and an almost melding of two individuals' minds. People who have been together long enough will anecdotally tell you that they end up saying the same thing or having the same ideas as their partners at the exact same time. There's actually science behind that as well. Human brains who share experiences together will synchronize more and more as the neurons connecting during that time will fire in similar pathways in both people, causing like a connected experience. And over time, this is why reports show people who have actually been married or together for a very long time, when showed things like marital videos, will have more activations in areas of the brain regardless of how satisfied they are with their partner. It's fairly interesting. But what if we could take that feeling, and this is a very real and physical process, and place it into another species through a process of like mimicry? Would another species even know what it is to love, or would they just be addicted to the feel-good chemicals associated with it? In the events of Significant Other, because in the last episode I only put the title of the movie in the description and pinned comment, and I had like people upset that I didn't say the name of the movie in the video, except I did it like several times. This is exactly what happens. Right at the cusp of an alien invasion, a bisecting creature capable of replicating any animal it comes across and assimilating its genes to become them comes across humans, leading to several issues for the couple, as well as an interesting discussion on the separation of humans into two beings in mythology because we were too alpha Chad. But how exactly would this process of replication work? Let's discuss that in today's episode. So we kick off our story to a road I think I literally just drove down, considering I drove from Georgia to Washington and then back. Just got home last night actually, and brother, I'm getting too old for this. The mountains out there though, legit calling my name. They actually have like a real fall out there instead of just 90 degrees in October, like in the great state of Georgia. But speaking of fall, we see a very strange colored meteorite falling towards the ground. And remember, it's a meteorite because it has the right stuff to reach the ground. We now jump over to something moving through the woods chittering. As it does, we never really get a look at its true form, but we see a deer missing one of its antlers as it looks up because it hears noise. And when it does, we spot that something is behind it as it attacks it, and then we jump over to a couple. We now meet Harry and Ruth. Harry is listening to some like mega ultra anemic music. It's just bad. I mentioned this once before in the movie Annihilation, which really upset one guy because I like listening to good music and apparently he doesn't. Anyhow, Ruth is passed out as she wakes up and like straight up causes the car to almost crash, classic. And driving through some chef's kiss forest and mountains, they pass by the same area where the meteorite hit. We then get the title card. Stopping off at Bigfoot's Burger Shack, they eat some food as Ruth is trying to memorize the book of poisonous plants. A youngling comes up to take their trash almost immediately after they started eating. This interaction is a little odd, and he asks, "Did you see the red star coming down?" And obviously he's a little disturbed by it. Now here's the thing, this was just a meteorite. I mean, I was in Sheridan, Wyoming at 2 a.m. the other day driving through, and I saw one coming down that was green. It's not really that alarming. Now, what was alarming was driving at 3 in the morning on I-90, not passing a single car for 45 minutes in South Dakota. That was a weird experience. Stay strapped or get clapped, need apply here. And I gotta say, that is actually the only time I've ever felt marginally creeped out on a major highway before. Anyhow, the youngling's mother tells him to come inside as Harry asks, what was that? We then hear some more anemic music as Harry then parks the Jeep, guaranteed to not start back up because it's a Jeep. Now, if it was a third-gen Toyota 4Runner, that would make more sense to be taking that thing out there, Toyota supremacy. As they talk about going on a hike, Ruth is scared about going on this hike, and I'm not really sure why. She says she's comfortable going in the ocean with sharks in there, but not backpacking. Bro, there are sharks in there. This is not like a normal reaction in life, I'll tell you what. I mean, I guess there are bears out there, but just bring some bear mace and you're fine. As far as I know though, there is no shark mace. So as they walk along talking about being young and making out for the first time, it brings up memories of my first kiss where I slammed my teeth into her teeth. It was a literal skill issue back in the day. As Harry walks ahead, Ruth hears something and then turns around but sees nothing, so they keep going. However, something watches them as they walk away. Setting up camp, Ruth is kind of having difficulty setting up the tent while Harry cooks. Ruth entices Harry to set up the tent for her, and they'll go heels to Jesus later that night. So then further past that point, Ruth gets up to go out to the bathroom, or really just the tree. As she does, she spots the deer from earlier in the distance looking at her. See, this is why lanterns completely suck. Yeah, they diffuse light throughout an area, but if you hold up the lantern at night in front of your eyes to see something in the dark further away, you're actually giving yourself night blindness, so it's really the opposite effect of what you were going for there, and it really isn't going to cast the light that far anyways. What you want to do is hold it above your head so that you're not blinded, but you can at least pick up some light reflecting off what you're looking at. Don't hold it up in front of your eyes. Like, I never understood why people do that. Anyways, the deer then runs off as Harry comes up and jump scares her, and they go back to bed. The next morning, as they continue their walk, they finally make it to the Pacific Ocean, which I have yet to see, even after going to Washington 3 times now. I'm afraid to get too close to where they filmed Twilight. I would need to go further south where they filmed The Goonies to make this work. Harry is acting a little sketch about it, and then he starts going through the usual rigmarole of, I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and then the music downturns and becomes nefarious. We hear tinnitus start to sound off, which is what I heard when I asked my wife to marry me. My ears literally switched off and just turned into an E. I imagine I was rather stressed. Actually, fun fact, I forgot to even ask her before she said yes, so I just kind of stood back up and was like, oh, okay, cool. It's kind of weird what your mind will do. And that's exactly what happens to Ruth. She almost had a panic attack and starts hyperventilating on the spot as her body tries to mission abort life. She almost goes over the edge but gets grabbed, so she starts popping pillies. I would like to know what these pills are that almost have an immediate effect on her as soon as she swallows them. It seems to be more like a placebo effect more than anything, because as long as she believes that the medication will instantly work, then it does, which is actually fairly interesting, so let's talk about that for a moment. The placebo effect, though relegated as, well, that just means nothing was wrong in the first place because you were able to outthink it. That's actually wrong. Now, essentially how the effect works, or at least how we viewed it in the past until very recently, was that anything modulated by the brain could be controlled through a placebo effect. The main one being pain. The example that can be used here is when people are told a medication that they are taking will reduce the pain that they are experiencing, their brain will believe it and release endorphins, which allows for the decrease in the sensation or the perception of pain, even when they just turned out to be taking sugar pills. Now that's all well and good, right? I mean, it's a neuropsychological issue of pain being controlled at the source by the brain's ability to recognize it through the knowledge that what they're taking should work. Where it kind of goes into the land of oddities, however, is when it comes to an immunological response. The perception of pain is one thing, but the ability of the immune system to have a response induced by the brain is exceedingly strange. Almost like a brand new form of biology, or at least an avenue of study. Essentially, what they were able to induce through actual knowledge of how the body responded was the proliferation of T cells and a diminished cytokine production in response to an infection. And this was accomplished through the placebo effect, indicating that if a person believed hard enough in the information, they could alter the behavior of their immune system. Now, take this with a grain of salt. There are many other factors that could have contributed to this outcome, but the point is, we are only just now beginning to realize what sort of influence we have over the behavior and functioning of our bodies. And this is how, on the surface, there's really no telling how deep this whole thing goes. If we fundamentally understand exactly how our bodies operate and what is needed to, say, influence something like gene expression with the precision necessary, possibly we could use our brains to increase mitosis in one area to heal faster. Or maybe we could regrow an entire limb by reactivating genes that have been switched off since the completion of gestation, all by using our brain, which would be reliant also on the placebo effect. Now, obviously, this line of thinking is a little out there, but so would be the concept of altering the behavior of the immune system with the brain just a few decades ago. I mean, you'd probably be laughed out of like any medical establishment for just even mentioning it. It's really kind of cool food for thought. Anyhow, so the proposal went over like a wet fart in church, and all I can think of is the Commander Shepard meme from Gamer Poop, where he tells Ashley that he wants to be more, and she says that she needs more like time to think about it, and then the red alert meme starts like telling him to get out of there, probably due to the fact that I experienced the exact same scenario with my ex named Ashley. It was great times. So I have to kind of agree here. I mean, if you ask a woman to marry you and she turns you down, could be a hot take, but I'm not so sure I'd stick around after that if the goal is actually marriage. So he gets shot down, and now there's a wonderful and magical 4-day hike back to the car. That's got to be one awesome experience. It's totally off track, but I actually went down to spring break with a woman back in college. Anyhow, she was my ride, and things on spring break happened, and we ended up partying with different groups and talking to different people, and then we got to ride back together. 200 miles! And she wasn't very thrilled with me, so there's nothing like a several-hour car trip in complete silence. I asked at the end when I should call her again, and she started yelling at me, so I just kind of shut the door and got in my car. She didn't think it was very funny. Anyhow, this man, much like me, thought this one definitely through. So they get to the tent and then set up for the night, and it's raining. Really apropos weather. She blames him for asking her to marry him. Okay then. She's worried about marriage locking her in. I mean, it kind of does, yes, but I think it's worth it. But probably should have gone to therapy for that one. Harry then goes to the tent, as then we can hear snorting in the background. The next morning, Ruth finds a note that Harry left saying that he was going to go for a walk and will be back soon. Seems like the kind of go for a walk guy. Ruth then checks her phone and calls to her therapist, and he doesn't answer. So she heads off into the woods deeper to get some signal, and then hangs up on the secretary for some reason before spotting a tree covered in a material, and then finding a deer's blurry head. Sometimes the blur will actually disrupt cellular adhesion and then make you fall apart. You hate to see it. It's very common for deer in the Cascade Mountains. It's really a problem. Lame jokes aside, she runs into Harry, who just happens to be there, and then he sees the deer as well. Harry says, well, it's some sort of fungus on the deer, so they elect to go back to camp and relax. Is it a fungus though? We'll find out. That night, Harry then reads the book suggesting the deer had papillomavirus and was covered in warts. Yeah, that checks out, I'm sure, because usually papillomavirus also perfectly splits your head in half. They discuss further about the blown proposal, and Ruth is worried about whether Harry will love her in the future and how marriage will ruin what they have, all the standard concerns, and then they go back to bed for the night. Getting up the next morning, you're probably wondering when something is actually going to happen in this movie. It's very soon, trust me. As Ruth goes to drop the kids off at the pool, she spots flowers that she saw in the book earlier, and then enters a cave system seeing something glowing. Upon entering, she follows the blue material back to a pool on the ground, and doing the most human thing imaginable, she pokes it with a stick. As she turns, hearing rustling, and then screams. Back at camp, Harry continues eating his food as he goes to look for her as she's been gone too long. He spots her standing there creepily in the woods, like a real weirdo. She says she was distracted and thinking about stuff as Harry asks if she's alright. She then follows him back to camp and they begin their hike for the day with her staring at him throughout the hike. Stopping again that night, she watches him from across the fire as Harry wakes that evening and then Ruth is gone. Getting out of the tent, he goes to look for her as she sneaks up on him holding a knife, saying that she thought she heard an animal. She hands him the knife and then they go back to the tent for the night. Ruth, however, has had her eyes open the entire night after being asked how she slept, and then Ruth continues to act like a totally well-adjusted person, facing away from Harry as he keeps trying to talk to her, but she's not really engaging at all. Ruth apologizes then about being weird as she says she hasn't been feeling like herself. Ruth then says maybe she was wrong about getting married. Maybe they should do it. Harry is elated by this as they begin their hike back out to the ocean, and it'd be hilarious if she said no again. Heading over to the cliffs, Harry goes to ask Ruth, and she says yes. Of course, it's about this time everything goes alarmingly sideways as she kisses him, and then knees him in the crotch and throws him over the cliff as he lands on the rocks below. And I bet you didn't see that coming because neither did I. And they say the worst thing someone can do is just say no. Anyways, Ruth now begins her mad dash through the woods. Running pretty much all day, she starts getting a mega side stitch, and also fun fact, there is no singular reason why we have side stitches or why they even occur. One of the theories is that maybe it's increased blood flow around the body, and that puts internal pressure on the organs by blood being forced into the liver and spleen, which causes blood vessel expansion. Another states that movement from running causes your organs to pull down in your diaphragm, though honestly this still happens when you swim, so even also if you're properly conditioned, side stitches are also less likely to occur doing the same activity, so they aren't really sure what causes it. I always like to point this out, even with consciousness, humanity thinks we have our bodies figured out, but the reality is these things operate all the time and we still aren't sure of the mechanisms behind why our bodies do what they do. It's honestly bizarre sometimes. For instance, how your brain knows where your organs are, yet your conscious brain doesn't necessarily know where your organs are, or why sometimes in certain people, their organs will be mirrored on the opposite side of their body as to where they should be, and there are no ill effects. Or if you take out your intestines for something like a C-section, they don't really have to place them back in any particular order because your organs will just slide back into where they're supposed to be over the next few days. What is that? Why does that happen? Do our organs know they're organs? It's best not to think about it swimming around in your abdomen, I suppose. So moving on. After her nice jaunt, she eventually passes out from exhaustion or a panic attack and then falls to the ground. Laying there seemingly for hours, other hikers then happen upon her as she rolls over and looks at the man and woman creepily. They give her some water and then set up camp for the night due to them not having any signal on their phone, so they can't call anybody. They build a fire and begin cooking as they keep trying to talk to Ruth, but she just sits there like a completely normal human person, ignoring them. Ruth keeps telling them that she doesn't remember what happened as she stares at Ray holding a knife cutting up meat. Vivian talks about surfing as she mentions there are too many sharks out in the water to surf there now. Vivian then elects to walk out further to try to find some service as Ruth then grabs the knife. She looks at Ray and Vivian as she pulls it on them as then Harry walks up. Oh, complete fake out. He's actually not looking too worse for wear considering he just fell several hundred feet. It's the power of love. So Hair Bear then approaches the camp as Ruth starts freaking out, telling everybody to run, as then Ray confronts them. Ray goes to punch Harry as Harry basically says he comes in peace, and then Ray's hand falls to the ground. Ray then looks at his arm, realizing that it was his hand, and it's just been cut off, and he has no clue by what. Looking at Ray's finger, he has razor-sharp blades coming out of it, and then he tells Ray, hey, thanks for finding her, as he flicks his finger upwards, doing something to Ray. As Vivian runs off to find Ruth, she spots her behind a tree and then tells her what's going on. She says it's not Harry, and then they hear Ray calling out in a strained voice as Vivian goes to him. Ray says he's okay as Vivian walks up, but Vivian asks where the other guy is as Ray says he's right behind him as blurry head syndrome also gets to him and half of his head peels away. The dude was just like straight up bisected. Now the question becomes from here, how long can you actually stay conscious in this state? So when I first watched this, I thought maybe it was Harry who was like mimicking his voice and then was just holding up Ray's body, but actually we can see his jaw moving during that point. So this indicates that Ray is actually still very much so alive. We see that typically the alien does not bisect a person entirely, but instead appears to start about mid to upper sternum. With this being the case, as long as the aorta and pulmonary veins are not hit, considering the immense pressure that they are under, they still would be able to deal with the heart pumping, which in turn would still be perfusing the body quite easily, or at least as it's intended to. But the real question becomes, what about the spinal cord, the brainstem, and the brain itself? The slicing appendage that the alien has is so thin that it's almost transparent to a degree. To create a cut so small that it would be at least like semi-operational, we are talking about potentially only a few atoms thick. Now this would make the blade incredibly fragile to bending forces, but if this small of a cross-section were possible, which that's what appears to be what this blade can do, it would divide any cell directly in front of it by cutting it in half and also bisect any structure. However, upon doing so, the divide in the body would not actually be that bad. It may be possible that because of the small distances, if outward pressure is applied, the person could remain alive for a short time with very minor brain bleeds kind of going on. However, once the external pressure is released that's holding the two sides together, they would fall apart. What's also important to remember is the blade likely followed the pathway between the two hemispheres of the brain. Along with this, some of the major arterial blood supplies of the brain were likely spared based on where they are located, at least allowing for some perfusing of this organ. However, the major vessels, such as the basilar arteries inside of the circle of Willis, would have been sliced, but because they were sliced so thin, the leaking of the blood may not have reached the point where it was causing tissue death in the brain as of yet. Likely it would happen within a few minutes though, but with the added pressure from the outside holding the head together, the vessels are pressed together as well. Along with this, because the slice came between the two sides of the brain, the corpus callosum would be severed, which is a highly interesting portion of the brain to slice, because the corpus callosum, as we know, is responsible for communication between the hemispheres of the brain. When this happens, it has been noted that the person is still operational and can still talk, but sometimes one side of the brain will make up a lie about what they see or what they experienced, and the other side of the brain will try to explain why they just said that. But along with this, we can assume the pons, medulla, midbrain, and cerebellum are also severed, but still even with this issue, communication may be limited in some ways, but it may be that because the blade is so thin, quite literally, it may have passed through some of the synaptic gaps of the brain tissue, allowing for at least partial communication to continue. And this is how most of the consciousness was maintained, as he tried to warn his wife the guy was right behind him, but also that same guy was holding his head together. With the lower functions of his brain bleeding out, but the cerebral functions mostly intact, he could still talk. Though as soon as the alien let go, it would most definitely be lights out half a second later, and we will see a similar process here in a moment. Harry retracts his tentacle as Vivian turns to run, but totally exposes her spine. He slices Vivian, severing her spinal cord quickly, and she is paralyzed there. This process seems to have been more diagonal, as it does not appear to like completely go to her head, in which case it appears the spinal cord is fully severed with enough spacing to disrupt all function and communication. He tells Ruth to come out as Harry then sends a finger appendage through the temple of Vivian's skull, hitting several vessels and causing a fair amount of destruction to the neuronal tissue, resulting in an instant knockout. He yells at Ruth, asking how she knew, and she says that she saw Harry on the wall in the cave, bisected, covered in that fungal material. Although, considering this is clearly an alien, I doubt it's a fungus. I think it's probably more likely just alien technology used to kind of immobilize somebody, because it would make sense that the alien would say, oh, it's a fungus on the deer, because he didn't want to be found out. But as she started her run back, she realized that she also needed to play along after dropping most of her pills to calm down. Harry retracts the finger appendage and says that he's pissed off. He tells her that he's a scout, and he goes to planets first and then reports back to the other. He goes to take her out another time, but realizes he's having difficulty actually going through with it. He mentions out of all the creatures he could have stumbled across, it had to end up being this guy, and that he was better off as the deer. He now realizes, I can't actually take this woman out because he loves her apparently. He wonders if that's even possible. Because of this, he turns to tell her that he loves her, and then starts chasing after her like a real psycho, telling her she has nothing to worry about. I love you. She then swings a stick at her as he says, this is so us. Dude, I guess it's a great time when my wife swings a giant stick at me as well. He goes on to explain that he has all these thoughts, or at least all Harry's thoughts, wants, genetic sequences. Everything Harry had, he now has, and is a perfect clone of him, essentially. He starts naming off memories that they had together, which is quite interesting neurologically speaking. The human brain is a fairly complex piece of machinery, even when sliced in half, but essentially memories are formed within the hippocampus located in the temporal lobe. From here, episodic memories are indexed and can be retrieved for later usage. And just a fun fact, given its proximity to the olfactory bulb, this is why smell can bring back memory in a powerful way, as the two are very close to each other and are linked quite closely as well. When a brain indexes a memory and stores it, that takes a physical place within the brain through things like neural pathways. When these pathways fire in a specific order, this helps you recall a memory. Now, one of the strange things about the human brain, if you really think about it, is for us to even have a thought, the brain must start firing to create that thought or retrieve a memory. How does the brain know to do that before the brain should even know to do that? Yeah, it's completely mind-blowing that this 3-pound piece of chemoelectric anxiety meat and fat in our skull operates the way that it does. Like, if you sit there and just think about anything, know that the thought before the thought even began had to include a thought somewhere along the line before it was even a thought. It's very strange. But the takeaway is that your memory is very much so based on neuronal connections, which means those can be copied and replicated. When the alien assimilated Harry, which we will see how that's done in a moment, not only were the genetics taken, which in turn would allow for the actual creation of neurons, as clearly the alien combines whatever genetics it takes over and its own cells to express as the assimilated species, but by taking this genetic information, it may not just be splicing it into its own genome, but having at least some version of its cells where the protein structures are built, creating a human body's appearance while having its own foundational cells. And being an alien, it must still be intact, otherwise it would be completely compromised. And this means it could present as human, but never truly get lost in the sauce. Or at least that's how it's supposed to work with every other animal that is assimilated until it runs across humans who are just literally built different because of our bonding mechanisms. When Harry was assimilated, the structure of his brain at that particular point in time would have been flash mapped, so to speak. You can kind of think of it this way. We never see what the alien truly looks like, but we can assume it must have its own functional brain to at least become spacefaring. In order to properly interact with the native dominant species, its brain would need to be connected to the newly formed brain tissue that it uses to interface with other species of the planet. You can kind of think of it like growing an external human brain that its alien brain then connects to. The connections inside of the brain would allow for it to use this flash-grown neuronal tissue to understand all memories, languages, feelings, and experiences that the original host once had, even though the host is now gone. In doing so, the alien could seamlessly blend in. In fact, it kind of brings into question, if you rip the alien out, would the human body just be that person? So now, typically with a species that is trying to assimilate, as we will come to find out, all of the things it has been, human brains are different. The tissue that we have within our brains releases chemicals associated with love beyond just reproduction. It's because it was man-made in God's image, not you, creature, but by the necessity of connecting and firing through adjoining neurons, allowing the alien to understand life here, it is also influenced by the same tissue in ways that inadvertently do make it get lost in the sauce. Having never run across a species that feels like we do, because seemingly it's just gotta be a certified Earth classic, species here bond for other reasons beyond just creating young, or at least some do, some don't. In fact, there's actually primates who, they just get like totally freaky with it, and then they just move on. Harry takes the stick away from Ruth and begins to tell her that he's feeling those feelings and not just the part of him that is Harry. See, it also impacts the alien brain as well. Get dunked on. Harry then tells Ruth that he wants to show her something. They then walk towards the beach as Harry continues spilling the spaghetti out of his pocket about everything. He mentions how love doesn't exist anywhere else in the universe. It's a singular human emotion. However, I disagree. I think also birds that bond for life have this as well, and I'm pretty sure that would classify that as love. Out of all the things that he has been, he's never felt this before, not even being an earth animal. Confirmed. Deer can't feel love. So they stop as Harry then reveals his ship. He mentions how it's a pretty sweet ride. I mean, it's no 67 Impala, but I guess by trash alien standards, it's passable. You know he gets dunked on for preferring, like, the Ecclesias one-door model over the Gleepglorp coupe, and they are right to dunk on him. You see, the 3050 Gleepglorp had at least 1.6 million horsepower over the trash-tacular Ecclesias model, which had a Harry starts telling Ruth that they need to get out of there, find some planet where nobody will ever find them, because Earth is due for an invasion, and nobody is going to survive. He cares about her, and Earth is going to be turned into a hostile place for human life, but from the sounds of it, it's pretty much all life. Ruth then agrees to leave with him as Ruth then grabs his knife. He asks her, are we really doing this again, as she stabs him and then runs into shark-infested waters, which is kind of a funny statement because they live there. That's like saying cities are human-infested or like a pasture is cow-infested. But swimming out, Harry is leaving a blood trail from his stab wound, which then grabs the attention of a passing shark. He immediately gets attacked and drugged underwater as Ruth then swims back to shore to not suffer the same fate. Getting on dry land, she starts running to get away, and as the day passes, Harry walks back on land with a wound on his leg healing and half a shark head being dropped. The mitotic abilities are absolutely insane on these aliens, but this does show something. It's not just an alien wearing a suit, but the body itself appears to be homegrown. And we will see here in a second that this control over the very function of cells indicates this creature is, and likely, what it looks like. Ruth makes it all the way back to couples camp and begins eating their food. As she looks around, she sees a hand and then grabs her backpack, seeing like all the places the couples went before having another panic attack. She takes her last chill pill to calm down as a tentacle emerges from behind her and hits her in the brainstem. Harry then asks why she keeps running away and that he's trying to save her. He retracts the tentacle and then starts dragging her through the forest. Waking up in the love cave, God, that sounds horrific. She is stuck to the wall with the tentacle extracting her genetic material. Okay, that also sounds bad. Harry now says that he's found a more pure form of love and begins changing in front of her as he becomes a creepy Ken doll looking thing. He eventually states love is of two people and they basically become one of just Harry and Ruth, so, you know, he should be perfect now, essentially. Which is odd, but, I mean, why are they not blending? Why does he just look like Ruth now? The alien goes on to mention how Ruth is in so much pain that it did not realize, and also it doesn't realize that he just inherited her panic disorder. As alien Ruth then goes to take out human Ruth, she mentions that's not possible. You don't just get to overcome pain like that. Well, you do with enough work, but you don't just get to ignore it. That much is true, trust me. It comes out in other fantastical and fun ways that you never dreamed of, like a stomach ulcer, or fear of flying. It's really dumb. As Ruth talks to her, she makes the alien Ruth start panicking by activating her almonds to an extreme degree. The alien cannot breathe at this point because his jimmies are too rustled, as Ruth then exits her cocoon. Alien Ruth then goes for her pills, but cannot find any, as she starts freaking out saying she can't breathe. Human Ruth starts trying to calm her down and tells her to just lie down as it helps. So then she immobilizes her arm and picks up a rock and goes absolutely cave woman on the alien. Humanity's number one, baby. Causing blurry brain syndrome, we almost immediately see the brain begins to heal. But what would this take and what does this indicate about the creature? First and foremost, for the brain to heal itself, using human tissue, this means that the creature, while looking human, is something else entirely. It's not just a blending of alien tissue and human tissue, but more likely is a human that is built and the alien in its original form is contained within. Given what we see with the tentacles, I would be inclined to believe that this alien likely looks like a helminth or a worm, and likely resides within the torso or abdomen area, running through the neck and into the newly formed brain. The body would be built around it using the genetic material and likely a template stem cell that it can then use to grow the body by information from human genetics. And in this way, the alien can interface with all cells of the body because it's a part of them, and part of the animal is assimilated. Those cells will have all the genetic information, which would form the composite cells into the desired shape of the species. And this is why when it is like attacked by a shark, the damage to the body doesn't really matter. It's just an external facade. The creature deeper within is the actual living organism controlling everything. Sort of like how when we get a cut on our skin, it doesn't really take you out because those cells may be damaged, but your nervous system, which lies deeper inside, is perfectly fine. The alien exists in the created body much like this. When the brain was destroyed by Ruth, while the body would be somewhat incapacitated, the alien would be able to forcibly divide those cells and heal it again because it uses a newly formed brain as a supplementary organ, not the main organ of consciousness. Now, do bear in mind that this ability of mitosis would cause a tremendous amount of heat, which would, in theory, cook cells, but this is combined with alien DNA, so it's totally possible that they just have a different form of mitosis that is allowing it to actually divide as fast as it is. However, should she have gone deeper, it may be possible that she could actually get to the alien nougaty goodness and destroy it. Although it seems just as possible that it could fight back even in its regular form, but this is how it's able to take Ruth's genetics, which ultimately results in its own suffering. By grabbing her genetics, all it's doing is replacing Harry's genetic coding in those stem cells for hers so that they can express. Upon doing so, however, this opens up the alien to very human problems. Due to the communication between the alien brain and the newly formed supplementary brain, it also has to contend with human emotions, which do have an impact on it, as well as like human hormones, which seemingly can overpower it for a short while. This seamless communication appears to have both pros and cons, but the first cons seem to arrive with the assimilation of Homo sapiens. Ultimately though, if you don't take out the alien internally to the body, then the human body will just heal because what's keeping it going hasn't been damaged. And this is clearly seen when no matter what happens to the external body, as long as the internal alien body is okay, it will just make it heal. Getting back to the Jeep, we see the most miraculous thing happen. It starts without sending a rod through the oil pan. She starts driving out of the mountain range as the radio then begins kind of messing up as alien Ruth calls out to Ruth on the radio. She starts talking mad smack about what's coming and, oh, you really are broken, blah, 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 as in the background, hundreds of aliens begin touching down, kicking off the official invasion of Earth. So finally, the real question is, how would you even take this thing out? Bullets are out because unless you hit it exactly where it is in the body, it wouldn't do anything. And it may also just be an earthworm scenario as well, considering it appears to be somewhat like a worm, meaning that cutting it in half, like if a bullet hit it and cut it in half, it might really not do that much to it. Knives are also out, as you don't want to get near these things, as even fall damage doesn't work because the body just protects it. But I see three major ways to destroy these aliens. The first is just good old-fashioned concussive force detonations. With enough energy imparted directly into its body, this would not only destroy the human form, but the alien within, shredding it to pieces, though it is still unknown if it would be able to heal. The second method is our good old friend who's been with us forever, straight up fire. A flamethrower, regardless of external meat, would raise the internal temperature to the point that it would disrupt chemical reactions of the alien cell. We know it must chemically be reliant on at least O2 for its metabolism, as it almost met its end with Ruth saying that, or at least alien Ruth saying it couldn't breathe and falling down. The alien itself appeared to be suffocating because the external body was suffering. By raising this heat, enzymes fail, metabolisms stop, and eventually the cells are charred and destroyed. The third option, which may be a little more difficult to come by, is radiation. Now, as far as I know, we don't have any radiation force exponentiators that we can get a hold of, but if you could somehow get this species identified, you may be able to expose them to radiation, which would not only damage the outer body to an extreme degree, but the meat does not provide enough protection for things like gamma waves, which would then destroy alien DNA contained within, disrupting the cellular function, leading to their end. Ultimately, though, I think humanity is boned. Without knowing who is or who isn't human, the only way you could really tell is to x-ray everyone, and that's if the helmet even shows up on an x-ray. But I imagine this would get way out of hand too quickly for anyone to notice or even an effective plan to be implemented, and that means no resistance could be formed in time. And along with that, they know everything about humanity from the person they assimilate, so they could easily use our own countermeasures against us just beyond the finger knife thing, and rapidly the situation would just spiral out of control until there was no natural homegrown humans left. But anyhow, what are you guys for watching? If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be very baller of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'm bringing back merch. with someone who actually makes good shirts. So once I have that link, I'll start posting that in the descriptions. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about the body found near the Brazilian reservoir that, despite being out there for days, had no signs of decomposition. All their blood was gone, like there was nothing on them or anywhere to be found, and there were no internal organs and also stab wounds in the chest, just 2 of them. It's very strange. All on the heels of lights being spotted in the sky, which leads people to believe it was probably aliens. But speaking of patrons, I'd also like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astronaut, Rosie Kinch. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, as well as our scientists, Chad the enjoyer of explanations of B-grade horror movies, Florian, Lacune, Logan Satome, Lucian Dragon, and Octavia Serpentia. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running. It's greatly appreciated. I love you. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.